Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com.
You are sitting ringside with David Penzer on Radio Influence.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of Sitting Ringside. My name is David Penzer. We are so happy that you are here each and every week. This week, especially to listen to this thing we call a podcast. Hope you enjoyed last week our WrestleMania weekend wrap-up with Mike Freeland. Appreciate Mike's input and lots of interesting stuff at Raw and SmackDown. Lots of debuts. They after all that, and after how much I pushed and talked about how great it put Charlotte over, they had her drop the title to Carmella, Money in the Bank thing, and so yeah, you got to keep booking, and you can't rest on your laurels, but some of those things you just make you scratch your head and say, why did you do that? Anyway. Speaking of why did you do that, 2 weeks ago, we previewed the Andre the Giant documentary on HBO. We had the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, and Kevin Sullivan come on and tell some Andre stories. And I did get a chance this past week to watch the documentary. Excellent program. If you're a wrestling fan, if you're even just a sports fan or, a pop culture fan, a great 90 minutes of television. So if you haven't watched it already, I know there's people that have watched it like 3 or 4 times now. And I've watched it like twice. It's really, really good. And great footage in there, great interviews. And, but our guys, our experts, our Andre experts, $1 Million Man and Kevin Sullivan kind of nailed lots of what was talked about. And I was impressed. I was taking notes. They kind of nailed, Kevin Sullivan nailed about him not liking John Studd because John Studd walked over the top rope, and that was Andre's gimmick, and Studd being afraid of him. They also talked about the proportional size of his body. They had Ric Flair, of all people, talking about that with about Andre's proportionality. So that's like pot calling kettle, but we'll move on. Of course, tons of drinking stories. And you heard, if you listened to the podcast, if not, I suggest you go back and listen to Ted and Kevin telling the stories about traveling with Andre and the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, told a story about a crowded elevator in Japan and flatulence. And there was like at least a 3-minute segment on this documentary on the brilliance that was Andre the Giant's flatulence. Even lines from Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon putting over the flatulence ability of Andre the Giant. It was something to be seen. And we got our flatulence story on this very podcast. So if you missed that one, go back a couple of weeks and check it out. And so thank you to our 2 experts. We're going to get Ted DiBiase on to talk about his career in the weeks and months to come. And just wanted to thank those guys for nailing it. Really, we nailed the key points in the Andre documentary. So great show, and I appreciate those two guys. This week, want to bring on maybe one of the most humble Hall of Famers that ever wore that ring, and a guy that's done so much in front of the camera, behind the scenes. He is a good friend, and I think you will enjoy his story. And I'm talking about the leader of the Four Horsemen and so much more that he's done in his career. Please welcome to City Ringside, the one and only J.J. Dillon. Ladies and gentlemen, honored this week to have a legend, and that word gets thrown around a lot in this business, but this man is a true legend and a WWE Hall of Famer, the leader of the Four Horsemen, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of what J.J. Dillon has done behind the scenes and in front of the camera, the professional wrestling business. So we're happy that he's here to tell his story. J.J., welcome to City Ringside. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here on.
So we're going to go all the way back to, I don't want to date you, but we're going to go all the way back. I want to start at the beginning to 60 years ago, believe it or not. And you became the president of the Johnny Valentine, correct me if I'm wrong, fan club. I'm just wondering, in 1958, with the wrestling business so closed the way it was back through the late 70s, early 80s, how one becomes a fan club president of somebody like Johnny Valentine back in late 50s?
That's a great question, because it really was pretty much a closed business. But I started hanging around as a kid, 16 years old, and I think over a period of time, that you earn trust. And two people that I became close with in that era were the original Zebra Kid, George Bolus, and Johnny Valentine. And I just was enamored of Johnny Valentine. There was something about him. I mean, he didn't say a whole lot. He accomplished more with his entrance to the ring, just standing in the corner with a look. I was enthralled by it and approached him about starting a fan club for him, and he agreed. We used to have I was born and raised in Trenton, New Jersey, and we used to have live wrestling once a month at the Armory, the National Guard Armory in Trenton, and you could go downstairs, which is where the restrooms were, and off to the side where the wrestlers dressed, and they would then come out and go into a shower area. So they didn't have total privacy, and that's how I was able to interact.
It's funny. I didn't have this written down as a question, but it's funny when I hear your story. And, we know guys like Barry Rose, who is a Florida historian who got to know a lot of the guys when he was young. He was the president of some fan clubs, and you hear a lot of that. I used to hang around all the time. I hung around for about 10 years. I guess I was afraid. I guess my deal is I was afraid to say anything to anybody. I just kind of watched from afar. I would hang out the back and at the back of the Sunrise Musical Theater when you guys came in and left, and never really asked for autographs or never really asked to be a fan club president. But I guess that if you were bold enough back in the day to make yourself known and you were respectful, I guess there were some guys that would actually talk to you and get to know you.
I think it's true in life in general, and certainly was true back then. If you had a chance of having any kind of relationship, it's like you have to give respect to get respect. And I was very respectful even as a young teenager. And John, I asked him, and I even wrote up a letter where I asked him to give me written permission to start a fan club for him. And then I gave him a questionnaire about his background, because this was before the internet, before as much information as one could currently get. I remember I gave him a thing about, where he started and where he had his first match. And I don't remember all the questions on the questionnaire, but he filled it out and gave it to me.
Wow.
And at that time, living in Trenton, New Jersey, a lot of the wrestlers that were working the East Coast circuit, which would go from just north of Boston up into northern Maine, all down the East Coast, as far west as Pittsburgh and as far south then as Washington, D.C. And I again approached John in a respectful way, and he signed permission for me to have a fan club for him. And I asked if it'd be possible for me to come to his home and sit down and have some private time to meet with him. And he agreed to that. And
wow.
he lived in Wilmington. And as it worked out, I had to take a train from Trenton to Wilmington and then a cab to his house. And when I got there, something had happened where John had to go on the road at the last minute, and his wife was there. And she invited me to come in and said, John was expecting you, and he apologized. And I
get it. It's a wrestling podcast, but he's saving us money on our mortgage. Do you really trust this process? The reviews don't lie. 5-star review after 5-star review. We make it fast, we make it easy, and it's no cost or obligation. Give us a shot to earn your business. I'm telling you, you'll be glad you did, especially if you like keeping more of your own money. You don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket, so what are you waiting for? Hurry to SaveWithConrad.com.
I probably spent at least an hour there with her, just getting the perspective of the private life and the family of someone. But I was, very respectful at that point, and for him to invite me to his home, and for his wife, who was home alone, to have somebody knock on the door and say, and she knew that John had told her that he had agreed for me to come there. And then he got called away, I don't know if somebody got hurt or whatever the deal was. And so, she could have turned me around and said, John's not here, I apologize. And she invited me in, and I spent an hour with her and got a lot of additional information. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, you started refereeing before you actually started wrestling. Is that correct?
Yes, I actually was in college. I graduated from Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania. And at that time, 1962, so it had been my second year, Ray Fabiani, who was the president of the Philadelphia Lyric Opera Society, which was very highbrow, was also the wrestling promoter.
No way.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Opera and wrestling. Wow.
Opera and wrestling. He was president of the Philadelphia Lyric Opera Society. If you do a search into the background of Ray Fabiani, and I hung around, and they used to do a weekly television show on Wednesday nights at the NBC studio on Walnut Street in Philadelphia that was aired on Saturday, and it was driven to promote the big show once a month, which was at that time was either at Convention Hall or the Philadelphia Arena, depending on which they bounced back and forth, I guess, depending on the availability of the arena. And so I was friends with the guy in Reading where I went to college, who would go down every week to the NBC studio in advance, and he would get the ring. They had a small studio in the basement. It was like it was a movie theater, really, because there was a screen that they had to raise out of the way, and then they had a curtain that opened up, and there was enough room on that stage to set a ring that the front of the ring came right to the front of the stage, and it was the seating went up as if it was a movie theater, so the person could look over the person in front of them and see the screen, and it couldn't have seated more than, I don't know, try to remember back, but if you said 100, 150 people, that's probably all that it seated. And they would have live matches every Wednesday that they would record and would air on that Saturday. So the guy from Reading used to come down and get the ring was stored in the NBC studio. He would get it out of the storage, and I would help him set it up on the stage. And then when they actually recorded the show, we each had like a plain white T-shirt, and he would go to the one corner and take the ring jacket. I would go to the opposite corner and get the ring jacket. And it was like when I was in college, that was my 20 seconds of fame to my fraternity brothers to see me. Oh, wow.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, it was exciting, but it also enabled me then to, over a period of time, to make contacts with the guys that came in and like I say, to kind of earn their trust. And it just built from that. But that's how it all started for me. I was, and what happened was taking the ring jackets every week and being there. The one week that I rode down with the guy from Reading who set the ring up, and we would go down earlier in the day in order to, to have time to get everything out and set up. And a pretty severe storm front came through, heavy snow. And of course we were already there. And then some of the wrestlers couldn't get there, but a lot of them lived right across the river in New Jersey. And so enough guys were able to get there to be able to go ahead and record the show. But the referees were assigned by the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission. And no commission referee showed up at the studio when it was time to, record the hour show. And it's like, oh, well, we got enough wrestlers to do the show. We don't have a commission referee. What are we going to do?
I hear, Jerry, I hear that moment coming. And they looked at, because this happens almost every edition of this podcast, and I love it because it's just, and so let me guess what and I don't know the answer to this question, so if I'm wrong, I'm going to look like a moron. But so let me guess. So they turned to you because they knew you from taking the ring jackets and said, do you know how to referee? And you said, of course I could referee. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
There you go. Ding, ding.
The wrestlers, actually the wrestlers, it was like their suggestion. Well, what are we going to do? We don't have a referee. And they all looked at me. And even though I had never refereed, I had been around. And at that point, the referees in Pennsylvania, it was a political thing.
Right.
That most of the appointees were not wrestling fans. They would work the arena shows, and back in those days, they would get like $100, which was a fortune. And we're talking about 1962. So $100 in 1962 was worth that much, manyfold over. So
there's people working indies for $100. This past weekend.
So the political thing was, guys that really weren't wrestling fans, that the wrestlers would have to work around the fact that these guys, I guess, were smart, but they were not wrestling fans, and especially in the live arena shows where you didn't have so much heat on television, but in the arena shows where you would work returns and what have you, there was heat. And the other referees, some of which were, up in years, that when they were assigned to referee, and if there was like a hot finish, it's like all of a sudden, I don't know, my back. And so they knew that I was there, and I used to go even if I wasn't assigned. I didn't get assigned to every show, but I would go as a fan, and I would be there, and heading things for the promotion at that time from an office standpoint was either Angelo Savoldi or Arnold Skoland. And at the end of the show, the house shows, the guys would get advances, and he would sit at a desk and they would sign like a ledger. And if I worked the house show, I would get $100. That's the going rate was $100. And I would go down even if I wasn't assigned just to watch the matches because I was a fan. And when I wasn't assigned, either Skoland or Savoldi, whoever was there, would come up and they'd say, Vince really appreciates, this is Vince Sr.,
Sure.
really appreciates that you are here in case you're needed. He'd shake my hand and palm me like a $20 bill. Now, doesn't sound like a lot of money, but to a kid in college in 1962, that $20
Absolutely
went a long way. And so that's kind of how it all started for me. And then the big shows once a month, Vince Sr. would come, and I remember him as somebody who was always impeccably dressed, suit and tie, a very heavy smoker, and he became familiar with me and called me by on a first name basis. And when Willie Gilzenberg came over from New Jersey for one of the big shows, he asked Vince Sr., he said, who's the guy here that he's not refereeing tonight, but he's here. And he said, he's kind of somebody that is there for us if we ever need something special. And he said, in fact, he's from New Jersey. And that's how I then refereed one of the shows where he was there, and Willie Gilzenberg came up to me and he said, hey, he says, you're really very good. I said, well, thank you. I mean, he was then president of what was the WWE. And he said, I'd like to get you on the commission for New Jersey. And I said, hey, I if I get assigned, I've got a car and I can make the shots. So now I'm on the Eastern Pennsylvania commission list, and then on the New Jersey list. And then I even asked Vince Sr. one time, I said, I used to tape every week from the Capitol Arena in Washington, D.C. I've never been, I see it on television, and, if I come down there, could I work TV? Yeah, we'd love to have you. So I remember going down there, and they had the wrestling office was in the Franklin Park Hotel. That's where Vince Sr.'s office was. And there was also an office at a hotel up in, I think the Holland Hotel up in New York City. But Vince had his office in the Franklin Park, and the boys would all come in during the day. And I think they would get advances for the shows that they worked. And then every Thursday is when they would get the balance of their money. So everybody came in there, and they all, and it was like, I wasn't considered an outsider. I could go there and hang around during the day. And it was like, I was a kid in a candy store.
Yeah. No, I remember the moment in WCW where I sort of went from being an outsider to somebody that, people trusted. And it sort of, just as an aside, it sort of coincided with Junkyard Dog naming me Walking Man. And so he called me Walking Man, and everybody else called me Walking Man because all I did was walk around to get things signed and to run people for interviews and stuff. So it's just amazing how somebody, gives you a little credibility, and all of a sudden you feel like you kind of belong there, and you could build that into something. You built it into a career, to a Hall of Fame career. How did you transition from referee to professional wrestler? I know it says that you had your first match at the Vineland Speedway in New Jersey in '62, but you don't really consider that your first official match. You write on your website that it wasn't until 1969 that you wrestled on Dayton, Ohio television that you consider it your debut. So why the 6-year gap, and what did you do for those 6 years?
Well, there was a local wrestler, a Puerto Rican boy, who was from, I think he was from Vineland or had moved from Puerto Rico and lived in Vineland, and they wanted him to be on some of the cards, especially when they ran a couple spot shows. I'm looking at a poster that I have from an outdoor show in Vineland, which was at the Vineland Speedway. They put the ring on the dirt part in front of the grandstand, and there was a guy who one of the other referees had a gym that he, like a so-called wrestling school too, even though I certainly wasn't an accomplished wrestler. But I used to go up there, and Juan Rodriguez would come over from New Jersey to the gym, and the ring was not a true elevated ring. It was a ring on the floor with sandbags to hold the post in place, and you couldn't work the ropes because the whole thing would have collapsed. But you were actually in a ring. So I used to go down there and work out with him. And he then, when the local promoter in Vineland was doing a spot show, he asked Juan, he said, I want to put you on the card. And it was, in other words, there was an added match over the book card. And then he said, you need an opponent. And he said, well, I got a guy that I work out with in the gym who lives in Trenton. And he said, well, get a hold of him and then hook me up. And so we worked the card in the Vineland Speedway. I think I actually worked there twice. They came twice that summer. And like that main event, because there was a lot of migrant workers down there. New Jersey had a big thing for produce. And in the summer months, there were a lot of Puerto Rican migrants who would come there to work the fields. And so he wanted this local guy, Juan, to hopefully be a draw for the local people. He needed somebody to work with, which was an add-on match. So that's how it happened. And I'm looking at a card from Wednesday, July 11th. I can't look at the year. I think it was 62, but the main event was Miguel Perez against Hans Schmidt, and then Eugene and Tomas Marin, Puerto Ricans, against Skull Murphy and Danny McShane. Pete Sanchez was on the card, and then Juan Rodriguez. I used the name because I was such a huge fan of Johnny Valentine and had his fan club. I used the name, which is on the poster, of Jim Valence, Valence. And that was one of my first matches, and we were an add-on match. They didn't even have a dressing room at the track. They used a motel to change. And so my first two matches were at the Vineland Speedway, and then when they had a return show, we basically had a return match. And that's kind of how it all started with me. And then I was, like I say, a referee. What happened was at the weekly tapings then, meanwhile, there was one week where that snowstorm came in, and none of the commission referee, they had enough guys showed up to do the hour TV, but no commission referee. And the guys all looked around, and they were familiar with me, and they just said, you can referee, can't you? Sure. They threw me a striped shirt, and I ended up refereeing the whole hour because I was the only one there. And I knew instinctively, because I'd been a fan all those years, what to do, how to position myself. And the only instructions that they gave me was because the ring was on this small stage, and they had a hard camera to the back, and then a camera, like a roving other two-camera shot. Right. And they told me, do not walk to the front of the ring where you walk between the hard camera and what's going on in the ring. In other words, you move around three sides of the ring. You can go back and forth as much as you want. I don't want to see your butt go across the hard camera shot. And so I just knew instinctively what to do and ended up refereeing the whole hour. And then, they said, wow, you're very good. And I said, I thank you, but I instinctively knew what to do. And they said, we want to get you on the commission list here. And that's how it all started with me. And then I was refereeing. I actually refereed for 8 years while I.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. While I was in college, I graduated from college. My dream was to become a wrestler. And it ended up, I taught school for a year. I was conflicted on what to do, chasing my dream that I want. My whole thing was to be a wrestler. I went to college to get a degree because George Bolus, the original Zebra Kid, an old timer, said, I asked him one time when I was down in Philly, and I said, I want what, and I'm sure every wrestler has been asked this a jillion times. I want to be a wrestler. Can you give me any advice? And he told me there are two things. He said, number one, he said, get your education first. He said, because this can be a very cruel business. It can be it's a physical business. You're subject to possibly getting hurt. Something could be career ending. So if you have your degree in your back pocket, that's always there for you to fall back on. And then secondly, in the process of getting your degree, make sure that you master the fundamentals of amateur wrestling. And you may say, well, what does amateur wrestling have? It has a whole lot more to do with it than you think, because if you have been an amateur wrestler, a lot of the things that you can do will make you a better professional. Doesn't mean that you have to have that. It just is like more tools in your toolkit. And so that's what I did. I went to college with the idea that I wanted to get a degree. Went out for the rest of they didn't have amateur wrestling in New Jersey in high school when I went through there for whatever reason, I don't know. So I had never seen an amateur match until I went to college. And I went out after that second year with that advice and went out for the wrestling team. And I wasn't very good because I hadn't wrestled as an amateur, but the other guys, especially Pennsylvania, has got strong amateur competition all throughout the state. But I was anxious to learn and humble. So even the other guys wanted to help me because they realized that I knew nothing, but was there because I wanted to learn. And so that experience for those 2 years really, really, served me well. And after I graduated, I wanted to break into the business, but I had a child. I got married a month out of college. And my first child, my daughter Pam, was born, a couple months after that. So it's like, oh, here's this great plan I had in life where I'm going to be a wrestler and travel the world. And the reality had set in where all of a sudden, hey, I finished college, but I'm married and I'm responsible for this child. And I gotta get my act together. So I taught school for a year. I did different things, again, with the thought in mind that my dream was still to pursue wrestling. And Bruno Sammartino was the champion. It was the beginning of, in 1962, he became champion, and it became the beginning of a lifelong friendship with Bruno Sammartino, who I have so much respect for because he showed me kindness at a time when there wasn't anything that I could do for him. In other words, it wasn't because that's because that's his nature.
Sure.
And he recognized people that loved the business and were humble. And he helped me in many ways and has been a friend since 1962. So you can add up the years. It's a friendship, 50, 60 years. But there were different guys that came in to challenge Bruno, who was the champion for about 8 years. And one of the people that came in for a series of matches was the original Sheik from Detroit, Eddie Farhat.
Right.
And in the dressing room one night, just making casual conversation, I said, I've been a referee, but really my dream was to be a wrestler. And, it's just how things go in life. And he said, well, that's still what you want to do? I said, yeah, absolutely. But, it's like, how do you get that first chance? And he said, well, I promote in Michigan and Ohio. And at that point, my father, who worked for General Motors, had been transferred from the General Motors plant in Trenton, where I was born and raised, to Detroit. My mother and father had moved to Royal Oak, Michigan. And I said, well, my father and mother live in Michigan, so I would have a place I could go visit them and a place to stay. He said, if you come out and I'll give you a chance to put on the tights and we'll just see what you can do.
Wow.
So
everything happens for a reason, huh?
Oh, I had like a 4-day weekend for a holiday, and I was going to drive. I drove to Detroit to visit with my parents, and a couple weeks in advance, I called Sheik and I said, I'm coming to Detroit. I'm still working, but I have a long weekend. I'm going to come visit with my parents. And he said, okay, I will book you. And it ended up, he booked me in to do TV appearances. The first one was in
Dayton?
Dayton, Ohio, yes. And on a Friday night, and then there was a couple guys there, a guy named Johnny Carr who used to go, he said, well, the other thing was then Sunday I was going to work their TVs up in Walled Lake, Michigan. And there was a guy there, and he said, well, I'm here visiting my parents. I said, I'm going to work a couple of TV shots from Sunday. So what are you doing tomorrow? I said, I'm not doing anything. And he said, well, we go to Pittsburgh and we work TV for Pittsburgh. And he said, they're always looking for somebody. And I said, well, if I can hook up with you, yes, I'll go. So I jumped in the car with them on Saturday, went to Pittsburgh. And of course, I knew Bruno from all those years as a referee. And so an old timer named Ace Freeman and another guy named Rudy Miller, an older man, ran the office that Bruno had a little mini office where he would run weekends around Detroit, around Pittsburgh. So I went, and my first match was on that Friday in Dayton, Ohio, and it was a tag match with me and a guy named Ron Sanders against the Hells Angels, Golden Boy Dupre, and can't think of his partner's name on that Friday. And so my first single match then was the next day at the Channel 11 studio up of the hill in Pittsburgh. And I worked TV, and was my first ever single match. And my opponent was Killer Kowalski.
Wow.
And I am so proud of that fact that my first single match of my career was with Killer Kowalski. And I remember that as I reflect back, I've said many times that I thought it was the closest I ever came in my life to think that I might die in the ring. It wasn't because he was careless. He certainly wasn't. In today's vernacular, he was solid, but he didn't hurt you. But if he stomped you, it would go, ooh, knock the wind out of you. But he didn't it wasn't like he's going to break a rib, or he just was, Walter was just solid. And so I remember working the TV match, and I survived it. And I thought, wow, when whatever my journey takes me from here on out, I'll be able to honestly say that my first ever single match as a professional was against Walter Killer Kowalski.
Wow. So
not a lot of people say that.
No, not at all. 1971, you finally hit your first full-time territory, which was Charlotte, Mid-Atlantic. How was that feeling that you finally made it? We're talking about now, when 1958, when you were Johnny Valentine's fan club president, to 1971. So you've now been around this for more than a decade. How did that feel?
I was a referee with holding a job after I got out of college during all that period of time. And then had a chance to be in the ring because of the conversation with the Sheik.
Sure.
But then it was back to the real world, where I'm back at my job and refereeing on the weekends. And the company that I worked for was a trucking company. And one of the place that I was assigned to was in Youngstown, Ohio, or Niles, Warren, Ohio, right by Youngstown, about 90 miles out of Pittsburgh. So it worked out good because I could go into Pittsburgh and work TV, and then they would run house shows on the weekends. And because of my friendship with Bruno, I was booked just about every weekend. So that was my first chance to get some regular work, which is really, it's like anything else. You need that experience. And that reminds me that I would like to dedicate it to John L. Sullivan, who was from Pittsburgh. He was a friend of Bruno Sammartino and Dominic DiNucci, who trained him, and had a lot of matches with him real early in my career. And he was killed this week in a vehicle accident. Yeah, 71 years old.
Johnny Valiant.
Johnny Valiant. Yep.
Yeah. God bless him.
Knew him well. Yeah. Really, really saddened, by that news. But being around Pittsburgh, I met Jim Grabmeyer, who was from Springfield, Ohio. And Grabmeyer used to work around home for the Sheik and for Bruno during the winter months. And in the summer, he would go to Charlotte. And back then, Jim Crockett Sr. was living. And they would run additional shows during the summer. They would do outdoor shows in ballparks, and they would increase the roster. So I get a phone call one day, and it's Jim Grabmeyer. And he said, I just got down here to Charlotte. He said, they're short on talent. They're really hurting for people. And I told him about you and that you had this dream. And he said, based on just he had a picture of me. And he said, just based on his recommendation, they were willing to book me sight unseen.
Wow.
And he said, the only thing is I've been a heel. And he said, the only thing is they're short. They need a baby face. I said, I don't care. I can do whatever. I can be either. So this was like on a Saturday. And they said, well, God, they said, they want you here Monday. I said, all right, I'll be there. You'll start in Charlotte Park Center on Monday. I left my job. I had never been further south than Richmond, Virginia in my life, being a New Jersey boy. And I drove my car straight through to Charlotte, stayed at the YMCA, and showed up at the office, which was 1111 East Moorhead Street, met Mr. Crockett. And when I got to the Park Center that night, my first single match in what I considered to be booked in a regular territory was against Gene Anderson.
One of the best.
One of the best. And they came over, and Angelo Martinelli was a referee, and there's another guy whose name escapes me. But, you know, the baby faces were at one end of the building. The heels were at the other end of the building. And they came back, and I remember they said, you know, because they didn't know, the sight unseen.
Sure.
Just other than the reference from Jim Grabmeyer. And they said, well, we're looking for about 6-8 minutes. Okay. So I went out there, and it ended up, the name escapes me, but kept me in the ring for 16, 18 minutes. And it's like all of a sudden he realized that I was, even though I had no reputation, nobody knew who I was, he put me through the paces just to see what I could do.
Gene Anderson. That's Gene Anderson, correct?
Gene Anderson, yes. Yeah. And Gene Anderson kept me out there. And basically, you know, I came back to the dressing room, and the referee came over and said, wow, he said, you did a hell of a job. And he said, Gene Anderson, of all people, has nothing but tremendous high praise for you. And that was how it all started for me. And I ended up staying there. It was over 2 years. And I remember seeing Mr. Crockett. And then I got to meet Leo Burke, and the guys, the Cormier family would come down from the Maritimes, which they had their little territory up there in the winter, in the summer months. And then when they ran hockey arenas. So when the ice came down, they would then come to Charlotte and work Charlotte for the winter months, and then go back up there, and it was a summer territory. So Leo Burke, the Beast, and they saw me work, and they said, you know, they wanted me to go up there. Freddie Sweetan was a local guy up there, and every year they would give him a fresh tag team partner. So he had a fresh look every year. And they booked me to go up there for the summer. I would be up there the whole summer as Freddie Sweetan's partner. And I want to say, they're single. Every year they would have a single guy that they pushed on top. It was the Stomper, Archie Goldie one year. It was they had all big guys, and so I was the tag. I was penciled in to be Freddie Sweetan's tag partner. And about 2 weeks before the start of the season, they were going to showcase, I want to say Larry Zbyszko or whoever it was, ended up getting a chance for a starting date with Vince Sr. in New York. And they didn't want to tell him, well, you know, you're our top guy for the summer. And, you know, you just couldn't do that. They had to, on short notice, lose their top heel for the summer. And I remember with Leo Burke, I said, Leo, I'm coming up anyway. I said, you've had all these monster heels, Archie Goldie to Killer Carl Krupp the year before. And I said, I don't have that size, but I said, I'm a cocky wrestling heel that my interviews are a big part of my thing. And I said, I'm already coming up anyway. So I said, let me mention that to Rudy Kay. And, you know, he said, I mentioned it to Rudy, and Rudy said, you know, it's okay. And then the next day, Rudy called back and said, you know, the more I thought about it, to go and change the pattern of the big monster heel for the summer to be showcased, to have a guy that's a wrestling heel and can interview. And they said, we're going to give you the chance. And that's how I got my break in the business.
Wow.
I went to the Maritimes for the summer, figured in for the main, they were going to get me over, which they did. And then it was up to me to carry the ball. And I went from making, my first year in the business, I averaged like $270 a week, which in 1962 was a lot more than what that amount would be today. My second year in the business in Charlotte, I made $370, $100 a week more average. And I went up to the Canadian Maritimes on top, and I averaged over $1,000 a week for, I think, just a week or two short of 6 months. And in the meantime, Dory Funk had been the world champion, came through defending the title in Charlotte. And you know, he would come in for a week or two. And, you know, he told me, he says, I have to be careful because I can't be coming in to defend the title here and then seeing somebody and steal them for our territory in Amarillo. And I said, well, I would never say anything. And then he said, we're really interested in you. And then at a big show in Greensboro, Terry Funk came in with Dory Sr., the only time I ever met Sr., and they were in a tag match under Dory defending the title, and had me come down to Greensboro early and go by the hotel. And so I met Terry Funk for the first time and met Dory Sr. for the only time. And they said, we want you, when you're done here, to come to Amarillo, that you will do really well. We will give you a top spot. And we booked Japan with the Giant Baba. And so you're assured of at least one, if not two trips to Japan, which is, again, one of my dreams was to go to Japan. Now I'm being told, come to Amarillo, work for the Funks in a main event spot, and be assured of at least one tour of Japan.
Yeah. It's like it's happening.
It's happening. So that's what happened.
It's interesting to talk about Halifax, that territory, because that's where my wife's from. And so while she was never a big fan, I'm sure her grandfather was in the front row in Halifax yelling at you, and you were up there in the early 70s. But somehow by marriage, I was or not still am, but I was related to a guy named Bobby Bass.
Bobby Bass, yes.
Yeah, like because my wife's mom has like 18 brothers and sisters, something crazy, 13. So one of them married Bobby Bass years ago. So
wow.
So, you know, nobody ever really talks about that territory, but you know, yeah. I got married in St. John, New Brunswick, and
I worked St. John.
Yeah, sure, you know,
and I lived in Moncton, and we used to go as far as the tip of Nova Scotia to where the ferries to Newfoundland went, in North Sydney, and that was a 300-mile trip. Of course, it was Trans-Canada Highway, but still, we had some long trips. But that's where I got my break in the business, and so I have incredible fond memories of the Maritimes and going over on the ferry to Prince Edward Island, and in the summertime they would, during lobster season, you know, you could stop by the side of the road and they'd have stands where they cooked the lobster, and you could sit at a picnic table and crack fresh lobster, and it was like. I'm getting my break in the business, and I'm in heaven. It's
a beautiful area. It actually still is, and so we go up. Whenever we go up there, we always do the probably the same tour you did every week when you're up there. But we do the PEI and all that. But yeah, I'm sure my wife's grandfather, who pretty much raised her, I'm sure he was in your face a couple of times there in Halifax. So that's kind of
Halifax at the Forum was the big town, and then the following morning, you would do TV at the TV station in Halifax, and you were on TV, and you did one general interview that went on the network, covered all of from Moncton all the way out to the tip of North Sydney. And so when you had the same match for the week. And it would go to all the towns, starting in Halifax. And when you did TV, you would talk about your issue, which you could work returns and everything. The other thing was you could never mention the town.
Right.
other than being general, say, hey, I don't care if it's in Moncton or if it's in St. John's or if it's in North Sydney or there was another town. When you came out of Halifax, you would come up to the Trans-Canada, and there was a town there that they ran every week on Saturday, too.
My wife is from Wolfville. I don't know if they had a big enough arena to run on a regular basis. It was like a one traffic light town, and they ended up taking the traffic light out because they didn't need it. Seriously, that's not a lie.
Enough traffic.
No, seriously.
Yeah,
but,
people, what are they stopping for? There's no traffic. But I have such fond memories up there, and with lobster and actually getting to know people. I went out on a lobster boat, and where they would catch them and pull in the traps, and then if they had to be a certain size to keep, and if it was just undersized, they would keep it and throw it in a pot and boil it out there on the boat. And you couldn't bring it back in; you had to eat it.
Right.
And of course, it was so tender. And then going up to the ferry, they had scallops too, and I went out on a scallop boat off the tip of North Sydney.
Yeah,
when you go someplace like that, you go because it was like a vacation area during the summer, and people would come in there and look at the sights. And one of the most beautiful places in the world was Peggy's Cove.
Right. My wife's favorite place in the world.
Oh, my God. All the houses are brightly colored, painted different colors. And I've never seen water so blue that would, the waves would crash. And if I had to pick the most beautiful place in the world, I would say probably Peggy's Cove.
My wife doesn't really listen to this podcast, but I'm going to probably get her to listen to this one because lots of memories. This has nothing to do with wrestling, but since we're on that area, did you ever go whale watching?
No.
If you ever get a chance to go back up that way in the summer and see Peggy's Cove for one more time or something, I'd suggest whale watching. We went a few years ago, and it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had in my life. They're just up there, like the mutual commercials, where they're breaching and yes. It's just amazing. So.
I did that off of Hawaii.
There you go.
And went whale watching, and it is a phenomenal to see these magnificent animals that when you see them breach and their tail slaps and you look at the size, it's a humbling experience.
It really is, because I'm looking at the size of the whales, I'm looking at the size of the boat, and I'm thinking I said to my wife, I said, what if the whale goes under the boat and pushes the boat? We don't have a chance. And she's like, well, they just don't do that. And I'm like, well, I hope. but we're off topic. But yeah, it's always fun. It's a beautiful area up there. And now my wife will want us to go back, and the airfare is really expensive from Tampa. So we digress. So you headed up to Amarillo, and I know that correct me if I'm wrong, that Terry and Dory were both very influential in your career. Did you get in? Is that where you first got involved in learning how to book?
Well, when I started in Charlotte, I was months from my 28th birthday. So I wasn't a kid. And so I had a different outlook, knowing that my career was not going to be as long as an 18-year-old that could wrestle. I'm now already 28. So if I'm going to have longevity in the profession, I'm going to have to pay attention to the bigger picture. Most guys just worried about their own career. I wanted to know about matchmaking, how a TV show was put together, how you book the territory. So I became a student in the business right from the get-go. And when I went to Amarillo, the Funks would meet once a week to book the towns. And they invited me to come sit in. Could I throw out an idea every now and then? Yes, but I was there more just the learning tree.
Be a sponge.
Yes, a sponge to be around the Funks. And then, of course, my ultimate goal was, because of the reputation of Eddie Graham, who had taken and built the career of Jack Briscoe, that after a year in Amarillo, and which was my first 2 trips to Japan, right at the beginning and at the end of my tour with Giant Baba. Then from there, I went to Florida with Eddie Graham. And you talk about being under the learning tree. Oh, I've had a storybook career.
So many of the legendary bookers were under the learning tree of Eddie Graham. It's amazing, you know. Bill Watts, Dusty Rhodes, Kevin Sullivan, yourself. I mean, almost everybody that was a major booker, but you know, like Pat Patterson, and you know, who booked for Vince McMahon. You know, and WWE took off, WWF took off, but somebody under that tree.
Not to interrupt you, but this past weekend I made an appearance. WrestleMania was in New Orleans, and they had WrestleCon, which was like a fan fest. And I made an appearance for 2 days. Had a chance to sit at a table with Barry Windham, who, as a kid, had his first professional match with me. And he was destined to be one of the great stars of the business. And the table right next to where we were sitting was Eric Watts and the big cowboy himself, Bill Watts,
wow.
who I had not seen in years. And so it was like, oh, my God, again, a kid in a candy store.
How's he doing?
He looks great. He's doing good. He has a walker to get around with, but and he's a couple years. Let's see, I'm 75, and I think Bill is a couple years younger than me, actually. But you know, this business, if you're in it for a long time, and I've been fortunate that I see a lot of guys and walkers and what have you that. The hard rings in some of the towns. I mean, this business, if it's been your life, which it has for me, and I've been one of the lucky ones that I've been blessed with good health. But it was so good to see Bill, and I can't remember when the last time was that I saw him. And then when I left to fly back on Saturday, Eric Watts had a flight, and whoever took us, it was like a 30-minute drive from New Orleans out to the airport. And I rode with Eric, you know, and he told me, I told him, you know, what a great mind his father was, and kind of, I didn't pay homage to Bill Watts just because his son was in the car with me, but because he was one of the movers and shakers in our business when I broke in. Absolutely. And I told him, I said, to be here and just to be around your father, one of the true great minds in the business and a great performer in ring, drew a lot of money. And he turned around and he said, God, he like got emotional because he said, I live with my father and I have respect for him and I know about his history, but he said to have somebody of your, you know, he says, of your stature speak so highly of my father. He said, oh, you know, I can't tell you how much that means to me. And I said, I just have been lucky. Over the years, I've been around some of the great, from Eddie Graham to, like you mentioned, Dusty and Bill Watts and all these guys. I've been around some of the greatest minds in the business, and Pat Patterson, and I've been a sponge right from day one. Whatever knowledge I have is an accumulation of being around the great, some of the greatest minds in our history of our business.
And that's what you have to do, sponge it up. I'm curious if you guys discussed at all Eric's brief career, because he was really put in a no-win situation and when he got in the business. Yeah,
well, I said I understand, and there's been other, like Mike Graham. Mike Graham, if he was 10 inches taller, could have been one of the greatest champions in the history of our business, but God didn't give him that extra 10 inches. But in terms of physical toughness, he was a power lifter, and in the ring, he could do anything. He was a guy that if you underestimate what he could do and wanted to play games with him, he could tie you in knots.
Yeah.
And you know, he was that era around when Dick Slater and some of the really, you know, tough guys in our business. And Mike was, you know, he was a student too. He was around his father, and he absorbed a lot of that knowledge too. Yeah. He had a great mind.
Great baby face. And, you know, I look back as a kid, some of the best matches I saw were him and Steve Kern teaming up against either Saito and Mr. Sato, or even they had a brief, like, kind of feud with Jack and Jerry Briscoe, some of the classic stuff. But But yeah, Mike, I got to know Mike pretty well, and
yeah.
But the thing with
I want to send a shout out to Marvin Ward, who was the owner of Awesome Wrestling, and I first met him back in February when I worked an independent show in Waynesboro, and he's the one who brought me down to New Orleans for 2 days, and really one of the first class promoters that I've ever worked for, Marvin Ward. And I want just to send a shout out to him.
Sure, absolutely. The thing about Eric though was he just got put in an impossible situation. He had 3 weeks training, and they threw him out there, and he started beating Michael Hayes and Arn Anderson and Bobby Eaton, and he was the nicest kid in the world, and he felt bad, but his dad would just you have kids, you do strange things when your kids are involved and you're trying to do right by them, and it was a little bit too much too soon. But
being around Eric, it's something that certainly didn't go to his head. He was
great guy,
very, very a great guy, and very humble, and this weekend was exciting to him because he lives he sees his father every day, and he said, all of a sudden I know my father as father-son relationship. I know what his what he accomplished in the business, but he said this was really the first weekend where we were away from home, and here I am sitting at a table, Barry Windham next to me, and I look over and there's Eric and Bill and everybody that came by. I mean, Shawn Michaels was there, Bret Hart was there, everybody that you can imagine came by, and all of them stopped to pay homage to Bill Watts. And I said, your father was one of the icons in our business.
Sure. And
I said, it's exciting for me just to be here in his presence. And of course, that meant a lot to him to have somebody, feel that way about his father.
It's amazing to me, every time I'm, not often, but when I'm around you or I talk to you, we've been involved in a fan fest that I do here with another Barry Rose a couple times a year that I've mentioned, CWF Fan Fest, and but whenever I'm around you and you remind me of this every time or talk to you, it's amazing because after all the success that you've had in front of the camera, behind the scenes with the Horsemen, as the talent relations, head of two major offices, you're still like one of the biggest fans that I've ever met. And it's so cool.
Absolutely.
It's so cool. You're here you are, you're JJ Dillon, and you got 2,000 people at WrestleCon marking out for you, and you're sitting there marking out for Bill Watts. I just love it. It's great.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of guy you are, man. It's just awesome.
I have two Hall of Fame rings, and I mentioned that when I broke into the business, Hall of Fame to me was baseball in Cooperstown.
Right.
And to think that I was inducted in 2012 with the Horsemen in the WWE Hall of Fame in Miami, which was one of the proudest moments of my career. And then the following year, there is a legitimate Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame where they have a committee that prepares a ballot each year, and the ballot goes to a group of wrestlers, a group of reporters, a group of historians, and they actually have a physical vote about who's going in. And the following year, I was voted in by the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, and I look down sometimes and I think, wow, the one ring which the WWE ring is the first one that everybody looks at. And I realized that, Vince McMahon, I guess, decides who he's going to induct and not induct. But the other one was, I went through a legitimate process. So I've had the best of both worlds. And I look at as a 16-year-old kid that fell in love with this business. I got pictures up on my wall here when I was that age with Johnny Valentine and with George Bolus, the Zebra Kid. And I look and tell everybody straight to their face that I'm the luckiest guy in the world, because nobody loved the business more than I did, was willing to work harder than I was, and persevere. Because this business, and you're going to have a lot more failures and disappointments than you are successful moments.
Yes, sir.
And it's easy along the way to get discouraged and think, this is not worth, the disappointments. And I persevered through all of that. And now, all these years later, I've got 2 Hall of Fame rings. And it's not because I'm the most talented guy in the world. It's because the fans bought the tickets and put me where I am in a position to have success. And I had a lot of help from a lot of people along the way. You mentioned the Pat Pattersons and the Eddie Grahams, and to be around the Dick Murdochs of the world. And it's just, I look back on the career. I've had 3,200 professional matches. And I'm still a student of the business, still learning and still love this profession. And it's given me everything that I have. And I never look at those 2 Hall of Fame rings and think that there's something that I deserve. It's just that I've been very fortunate and thankful for all the people that supported me and helped me, and it's the fans. They're the ones that are the judge and jury, that they bought the tickets. If you don't have something that they think is worth putting the money down to buy a ticket to see you, and again, I'm not the only one, but back in Amarillo and Florida, places where I had a chance to work on top, then I guess maybe you could say, a little bit more pressure was on me to pay my way. You don't want to be on top and have a disappointing house, because the guys underneath are going to get paid according to what it draws. So I've been the luckiest guy in the face of the world.
So your first official booking job, was that in the Kansas City territory in the early 80s?
Yes. And my dream was to get to Florida and to be around Eddie Graham. And I from the Maritimes in Canada, I went to Amarillo, and from Amarillo, I went to Japan 2 tours, and I was hoping to go into Florida. And I called Eddie Graham before I left for the 6-week tour of Japan with Giant Baba, and he said, and right then Jody Hamilton, the assassin, was his booker at the time, and he said, Jody's doing a good job, and he said, I'm not sure, you get back from Japan, give me a call. So I'm excited to get back from Japan. I worked for a week. I always wanted to work Calgary and go to the towns up there and to go to the dungeon and the big house on the hill with
Sure.
because Stu and Helen were still living. And my career wouldn't have been complete without working that territory for a week and being around Stu Hart with all the Stu Hart stories. But I called Eddie when I got back. And Eddie said, Jody's here. He's doing a good job. And he said, I want to try to help you. And he said, any experience that you could get doing booking. And he said, I have a friend who needs help. And I would appreciate it if you would call him and be open to going there and just getting experience with a thought in mind that eventually I want to bring you here to Florida. And he had me call Bob Geigel in Kansas City. Now, a lot of guys, oh man, Kansas City territory, what
wasn't
kind of money?
it wasn't a lot of money there.
Yeah, a lot of money. And I said, Eddie, I appreciate that. I will call Bob Geigel. And I called Bob Geigel, and he was thrilled that Eddie had referenced me there. And I went there, and I worked a little over a year as a booker. Pat O'Connor was there. Bob Geigel was. I looked at Bob Geigel. I only met Dory Funk Sr. one time. That's when I was in the Carolinas. And Dory Funk had a big title defense in Greensboro, and Dory Sr. and Terry Funk came in as a tag team underneath card. And Dory said, I want you to come down early. I want to introduce you to my father and to my brother. And I said, I got to be careful because I can't be stealing talent. But when you're done here, I want them to meet you, and I want you to come to Amarillo, and you will do well in Amarillo. You perfect fit. We got Murdoch there and Ricky Romero, and just, the trips are, okay, some of the trips, but he said, you're going to get to go to Japan. And so I went down early and went by, and I met Dory Funk Sr. and Terry Funk for the first time. And of course, I've heard all the stories. I'm in awe of both of them. And the significance of that is, I said, well, I'm already committed to go to the Maritimes for the summer, and when it's over, I would love to come to Amarillo and work for you. So basically, I had a place to go when I was done in the Maritimes. I got a phone call after I'd been there for a month or two. And on a Sunday, they used to get together at the house with Senior in Amarillo and move the furniture out of the way. Gordon Nelson was there, and they had some guys, Les Thornton, and they would get down and go at it pretty good. And Dory Sr. had a massive heart attack, and Terry took him to the hospital, and he died there. So I thought, wow, I was so glad that I had a chance,
sure,
even for that one day, to have met Dory Sr. And just there was one of those signature moments of to met a guy that's one of the icons of our business.
So back to Kansas City, you go up there as a favor to learn for Eddie. It's your first official head booking gig, and you're, I guess as the booker, you're kind of allowed to call in whoever you want. Correct me if I'm wrong, but whoever you want to sort of, be on top and be involved. Who do you call, or do you just decide to use the guys that are there?
Well, for the most part, use the guys that were there. And that's what was lesson number one in the learning tree. That most of the guys, and I'm talking about the Bill Watts of the world, the Dusty Rhodes of the world, when they took a booking job, like Dusty, and I used to love when Eddie Graham would come into my office, and I had a small office, and I had a desk, and there was like a lounge chair, and Eddie would come in and sit down, and that's when I was at my learning tree. I'd sit there and just, as long as Eddie wanted to sit there and talk, I wanted to sit there and listen. I learned more, and I told Eddie, I said, God, it seems like, actually, it seems like yesterday as a kid when I went to Madison Square Garden to see Dr. Jerry and Eddie Graham, and Dr. Jerry with the cigar smoking was the flamboyant one. And it was only when I got in the business that I understand that the quiet one that was standing behind him was the true genius of that tag team. And was, for me to finally come there and be around Eddie, I'm there paying homage to him. And I said, I used to go to the Garden, and I was there when I didn't see Bruno win the title, but I was there when he picked up Haystacks Calhoun. That was the thing. Can Bruno Sammartino, the strongest man in the world, pick up 600 pounds of Haystack Calhoun? I was in the Garden and saw that. And I used to go up, and I said, I used to go up to the Garden and watch you. And I dreamed that maybe someday I could be in the business and get a chance to work Madison Square Garden. That is the arena. Any wrestling fan, if you say Garden, there's a Cincinnati Gardens, there's a Maple Leaf Gardens, but if you just say to a true wrestling fan, the Garden, they know exactly what you're talking about.
You're killing me, JJ. I never got to work it, but
well, here's my story. Now I'm in Florida. I'm mainly a manager.
Sure. This is 83, 84, correct?
Yeah, but working some.
Right.
But not a full-time wrestler. And when I did wrestle, I don't feel that I had the timing that I did. It was like when you're wrestling every day, it's, if you're a baseball player, it's like once you get into the season, that's when your true ability, because you're doing it every day. And I told Eddie, I said, I dreamed that one day I would be able to come to the Garden. I said, and now mainly I'm more of a manager. And he said, it would have meant a lot to you then if you could have worked in the Garden. I said, yeah, it really would have. And it kind of just a throw in passing thought. And so Eddie leaves my office. The next day he comes in and he said, Monday, April 23rd, this is 1984. He said, you're going to have a plane ticket to fly from Tampa to New York, and you're going to work Madison Square Garden.
Tito Santana, right?
Yep.
Wow.
And it's like, I'm just sitting there, pinching myself. Is this moment real? And so Eddie told me that the day before, when he left my office, he called Vince Sr. Now, Vince Sr. was at that point, which I don't think we realized how Junior had just taken over with Jim Barnett there to kind of guide him and lead him. And Senior was home in Florida and terminally ill with lung cancer, which didn't know that that's how bad it was.
Right.
And Eddie Graham called Senior. And Senior says, "Oh, I remember Jimmy. That's what he used to call me."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all those years he was, oh, what a nice kid he was. And he said, "Well, he's here and all working in the office for me." And he said, just talking, he said about the garden. And that was one of his dreams. And now he said, I'm more of a manager. And that I guess late in my career, I'll never get to work the garden. And so Senior said to Eddie, he said, he will be booked on the next show. We'll fly him up. He'll work the garden and fly him back. And Eddie came in and told me that. And
that
I
is
said,
so cool.
I said, "Can I call Senior and thank him?" And he said, yes. And I called Senior and I said, this is a kid's dream. And I said, I know that, there's expense involved. You're flying me up there just to work the shot and nobody knows me up there. This is strictly, he said, just stop right there. He said, you're being flown up because we want you here and you're going to work the garden. And I'm just happy that I can make one of your dreams come true.
That's an awesome story.
Oh, so I went up there and I've got a copy of they had a program where they used to put a sheet in there with a lineup for the night. And I was listed down below 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and also appearing in my name with the girls. And they originally had Tito Santana against one of the Samoans for an Intercontinental title match. And they used to tape it because they had the Garden Network.
Right.
So that night they moved me up the card to work with Tito, and I have a copy of that. I mean, I have the tape of them. And I thought, wow, I'm not working every day. The last thing I want to do is embarrass myself. Thank God, because I was around when Tito broke into business in Amarillo, so
sure.
I knew Tito, comfortable with him, and I just thought, I want to go out there and just be. And they were taping for the Garden Network, and there's Pat Patterson and Gorilla Monsoon doing the commentary. And even though they knew me, they knew their audience didn't know me from Adam. So there wasn't a whole lot that they could talk about. And when I watched the tape, they talked about everything, but me because, they didn't want to, I was there for one shot. And, just to work with Tito Santana. And I've got a photo from the Garden that night with Tito that he signed. And I've got the lineup card, and everybody that was there that night has signed it. Sergeant Slaughter was in the main event with Iron Sheik.
Oh, I remember that match.
Yeah, Greg Hammer Valentine was against Bob Backlund.
Wow.
I took the place of one of the Samoans against Tito. There was a 6-man match with Roddy Piper, Paul Orndorff, and Dr. D. David Schultz against Tony Atlas, Rocky Johnson, and Ivan Putski.
Wow.
Brian Blair was on the card. And I had everybody that was there that night sign it. I have it framed with the photo with me and Tito. So that was my one shot in the Garden to make my dream come true. And
you only need one, though. That's the thing.
You only need one. And Vince Sr. passed away about 4 months later from the lung cancer. And I called him and personally thanked him. And he said, he said, I'm happy to do this for you, not knowing that he was terminally ill at the time. And I came to find out, and this was right because Senior was so sick that Vince Jr. was spreading his wings, and Barnett was there to help guide him. And the Garden used to be a place that all the other promoters, if they wanted to kind of enhance the career of somebody, say like the Von Erich kids, they'd get them booked in the Garden,
right,
so that you could say, well, hey, I worked Madison Square Garden. And I was told and had it reconfirmed that I was the last outside talent, not working the territory, that was added to a Garden card.
Wow.
So
that is the story, and I'd love to see that picture. That must be something hanging on your wall.
Yep.
I'd be remiss if I know your time's valuable, so I'm going to move on. I'd be remiss if we had a conversation and we didn't talk about the Horsemen. And so you went to work for Jim Crockett Promotions, moved up to Charlotte. You were in the office working under Dusty as assistant booker, correct?
Yeah, actually, I went to I had a chance to go back to the Canadian Maritimes 10 years after I'd got my break in the business and worked on top. And they hadn't had TV for a while, and it was a real eye-opener to come back 10 years later. The wrestling audience changes, and they basically, very few people remembered that I worked on top up there and was a champion, and they didn't have, Emil Dupre had taken over the TV spot, and they gave the guy who was the ring announcer back in the day, who was trying to establish the promotion, they weren't going to give him the time slot back. They gave him an extra, they gave him an hour of TV on cable, was just starting out in its infancy. So the reality was that only a fraction of the audience that watched broadcast television had subscribed to cable, and that's what we were on. And they produced a fabulous show, and I went up there. Eddie Graham and Dusty gave me carte blanche to go through all their tape library, and I built 6 shows from Championship of Florida's library.
Wow.
With their blessing. And those 6 weeks aired before I went up there and opened up. And again, when you're at a television network that's in its infancy on cable, it was a harsh lesson that you're starting from the ground floor. And I realized that the guy who was putting up the money, after, I don't know, 6 weeks, whatever it wasn't much long after that, I said, you're paying me, and I'm not earning my way, and it's not because I don't have good ideas and not producing a quality television show. It's just that cable television is in its infancy, and I've learned in the business that your success is based on the number of eyeballs that are seeing your product.
Right.
And you're not there yet. And I said, it would be an injustice for me to stay here and take your guarantee every week. You're better off cutting your losses now, because you can't make it with just this exposure. So here I am, after Eddie and Dusty gave me this grand farewell, gave me all the tapes to go up there, and 2 months later, I'm calling Dusty to say, Dusty, man, it didn't work out, and I need a place to go. And Dusty said, well, he said, you got great timing, because I just made my deal to go and be the booker for Jim Crockett. He said, pack your things and drive straight to Charlotte. I said, well, do I need to call Jimmy Crockett? And no. He said, I'll make a deal for you. You come to Charlotte. We're back together again. I need your help. So that's what happened. I packed up and went to Charlotte. My first match was with Gene Anderson. Dusty was in the office, and I could never do what Dusty did. And you asked a question before about bringing your crew in. I realized that the great bookers in the business, the people like Bill Watts, when they would come in to book, they had a nucleus of top guys, 3 or 4 top guys that were their guys. And when they would come in to book, these guys would follow in, and I didn't have that nucleus of guys. Did I have the ideas, the fresh ideas, being able to produce a great television show? Yes, but I didn't have that group of guys that were my guys. And I learned that pretty quick, that was a huge part of, I learned that when I went to Kansas City, that I just had to work with what I had there. And it was very humbling.
Sure. So you're working for Jim Crockett Promotions. I believe you were managing Tully at the time. And the Horsemen just kind of came together kind of on a whim. You're all champions, and went out and cut an interview at the TBS studios. And Arn
first guys, not to interrupt, but the first guys that I went up there were Ron Bass and Black Bart.
Right.
And then Arn came in from Louisiana. Tully came in, and the Horseman thing was just, I actually then expanded and was managing Tully only. And Arn came in and did that classic interview where, he had Tully around him, and I think Ole. And, he did that interview where he said, take a good look at your screen, because never in the history of our business have so few guys dominated the industry. You'd have to look in your history books to the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse and held up 4 fingers. And it just was a throwaway line. And
Sure.
the next time he came out there, the fans that were there started. And that night in the arena, they're yelling, in the front row, the whole front row, 4 Horsemen, because it became an interactive thing where they were involved. And a couple of weeks went by, and Jimmy Crockett said, "What's this 4 Horsemen thing? I keep hearing about it." I said, "Jimmy?" I said, "If I were you, I would pay attention." Because I said it was something that it wasn't like a creative idea that somebody came up with and said, let's have a bunch of guys come together and call them the 4 Horsemen. I said it was a line that Arn threw out there, and the fans are the ones that picked up on it. And I said I would get behind it because it was the fans' idea, and it was. And it just grew and grew. And I was, as often been the times in my career, I was the right place at the right time to be a part of that.
Was it challenging? And if so, how did you handle living that Horseman lifestyle while also working for the office? Because the other 4 guys didn't have those duties. They could roll in at about 7 o'clock the night of the show.
Yeah, and I had to be up and either on the road be doing office stuff, or when I was in Charlotte, I had to be in the office at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then, and when Dusty was ready, he would roll out and I would stay, and I shared an office with Gene Anderson. But it's like, you do what you have to do, and you learn when an opportunity comes along that nobody is guaranteed anything. And you never use the logic, hey, I don't have to work all that hard. I earned this. No. Life doesn't work that way, especially in the wrestling business. And that you're only going to get out of it what you put into it. And I was grateful that I was there with Dusty, that Dusty had total confidence in me. He would write out the TV show, come in there and throw it on my desk and throw his Gucci bag over his shoulder and be gone. And Gene would be sitting across the desk from me, and I'd look at the TV sheet and I said, "Oh, he's got so-and-so down here 2 times. I got to put somebody else in there." And then I had Mike Jackson and George South, and they were my guys for TV matches to have the best quality guy. And I put a lot. George South came up to me within the last year or 2, and he came up to me one day and he said, I want to thank you. I said, "You want to thank me?" He said, "Yes. I want to thank you because I just own my own home. Wow. And I owe it all to you." And I said, "George," I said, "you owe me nothing." I said, "Whatever success you had, you earned. And I counted on you when I needed guys for TV. I knew that you knew what I needed, and you were there for me. That's why I kept calling you and why I kept calling Mike Jackson." So I said, put that thing out of your mind that I'm proud that you were able to save your money and buy your own home. And it wasn't because of my doing. You earned everything you got. And that's how I truly felt.
Sure.
And I've been very blessed my whole career.
So I don't know if you've ever been asked this question, and I honestly don't know the answer, but when I found out that you were going to be on City Ringside, I wanted to ask it. You were the assistant booker, as we've already established. You were also the manager of the 4 Horsemen. There were changes throughout the years. Barry Windham would come in, and then Sid would be in, and Lex Luger would be a Horseman. Since you were the manager of the Horsemen, when they were thinking...
I always correct you. I was never the manager of the Horsemen. I was the leader.
The leader of the Horsemen. I apologize. Since you were the leader of the Horsemen and also working in the booking office, did you get... when Dusty wanted to make a change, did he go to you, and did you have any kind of veto power or input on whether so-and-so would become a Horseman?
I might be asked my opinion, but not always. What did happen was Dusty, because Dusty, they used to talk about the Dusty finish, and like Dusty would go over almost every night, and I would be in the heel dressing room, and they would say, his ego is out of control, and we're getting beat every night. All of a sudden, our heat's going to be gone. And he said, "You're there in the office with him. Can't you talk to him?" And the reality was that I had a great relationship with Dusty. I was close with his family, with he and Michelle. I watched the boys grow up. But it wasn't the kind of thing where I could go into his office, close the door, and have that kind of a talk to Dusty. Because he was still Dusty, and I was still his assistant, even though we'd been a team for all of those years. What I did do was I would pull Jimmy Crockett aside, and I would say, "Got a problem." I said, "I'm hearing every night in the dressing room how the heels are getting beat every night, and there's fear that their heat is all of a sudden going to be gone and the business is going to drop. And we all know that when you lose that momentum, it's very hard to get it back." And I said, "I'm hearing all kinds of pressure on the road about Dusty's ego not being in check. And he said, "Thank you for having this conversation with me."
I don't know that there was anything was
Jimmy,
he able to do anything?
Jimmy?
Yeah.
Jimmy would go in and close the door, and he could talk to Dusty on a level, and he knew how to have a conversation with Dusty that didn't challenge Dusty's authority or what he was doing. And Jimmy was smart enough that the next night he would invite Rick to come over to his house with him and Myra and have dinner with him, which Rick used to do with regularity. And so the following day in the dressing room, he said, "Jimmy called me and asked me to come have dinner at the house with him and Myra. And we used to do that all the time. And it was so good to have that conversation. I feel like a different person. And I feel like it was like I talked to Jimmy. Jimmy talked to Dusty. I don't know how he presented it to Dusty, but Dusty backed off without me having any kind of a comfort. He doesn't even, I'm sure Jimmy didn't go in there and say that I had had a conversation with him. And Jimmy then invited Rick to come over to the house and have dinner with him. And now Rick felt he was the man again. He was important to Jimmy. And so I go to the dressing room the next couple of days, and it's like the whole atmosphere has changed. "Oh, Jimmy invited me over for dinner, and God, it's like everything's going to be all right." And I then would have to do that again, maybe 9 months later, because it would kind of like Dusty would get on a thing again where he was beating everybody every night. And none of them ever knew that I would call Jimmy aside, and that Jimmy then, without ever mentioning my name, would intervene with Dusty, would invite Flair to come over to the house for dinner. And it's to this day, I don't know that any of them know.
That's all they do now. It's all about soothing egos. And yeah, that was great that you were able to have that relationship with Jim Crockett, because the whole thing could have gotten out of control. We saw what happened in WCW when nobody was really able to talk to some of these guys. And but just for those people who might listen to this podcast who weren't fans back in the day with the Horsemen and Dusty, you could say what you will about Dusty's ego and about the Horsemen and but there was one spot that you guys did every night, and I swear to God, it never got old. I'll probably Google
the elbow. He'd line up the three heels. Elbow. And I'm already starting up on the apron. Elbow. He'd wheel around, give me the elbow, and I'd do the Hully. I think he named it the Hully Gully, which I stole from Sky Low, the midget, where I could get sideways on the second rope, and I'd be like a spider with my arms and legs. I could go back and forth, and some nights I could hold it for 8-10 seconds until I topple to the apron, topple to the floor, and then sitting there all disheveled.
I can see it in my mind like it was yesterday. And it got a pop every night. Boom, 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 boom. He'd go back and forth over all their heads, and then they'd all go down, and you'd come up and he'd do the little, shake his backside and give you the big elbow. You did the Hully Gully, and boom, the place exploded.
We used to call it the flip, flop, and fly. He'd flip, flop, boom, boom, boom. then elbow. And by the time he hit the third guy with the elbow, he'd turn around and there I was, boom, he'd elbow me. I'd do the Hully Gully on the second rope to the floor, and Dusty would be doing his strutting around the ring. I got excited.
Folks, yeah, if you've never seen it, I would suggest you Google it. I'm sure it's out there plenty of times, but it's or on WWE Network. It's great stuff. Hey,
go ahead. Talking about Dusty, I knew Dusty on a personal level, got to be very close friends with him and Michelle, saw his kids grow up. And Dusty, for all the criticism that was dropped on him, Dusty was a great personal friend. He was an incredible draw in our business.
Sure.
A lot of them looked at him and they thought, oh, he doesn't look like that legitimate athlete. Dusty was a legitimate athlete. He played football in college, and he was, though he looked like the plumber's son, the overweight. Dusty was a legitimate athlete, and he could go. And he was one of the great attractions in the whole history of our business. And I love the guy, and I really miss him.
Absolutely. We actually saw each other. It was ironic that there was a big fan fest at the Jewish Community Center. Jody Malenko put on, for those who may not be familiar with it, the old Armory in Tampa became the JCC new building downtown, and this was a fundraiser for a wall that's still being worked on actually for.
I was there out at the Jewish Community Center. Yep.
It's still being worked on. It's going to feature the history of championship wrestling from Florida. And unfortunately, so many of the names, there were so many huge names that were there that came out that night. I mean, even guys like Roman Reigns and Kofi Kingston from WWE. And unfortunately, I'm getting ready to go down there. And my wife calls me and said, did you hear the news? And I started to cry, and I know it was very emotional, but just how ironic that we're celebrating the history of championship wrestling from Florida with all those people that flew in and all those names, and it
became
happened.
A Dusty tribute.
Yeah, it absolutely did, and it was very emotional.
I got on a plane to go down to Tampa, and I turn my cell phone on. They'll come on and they'll say, "Well, those of you, if you don't have to get up and get out your bag out of the overhead, you can turn your cell phone on." And my cell phone lit up with text messages, and it was bang, bang, bing, 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 bing. And Pedro Morales had been in very poor health, and I thought, "Oh my God, no, Pedro has passed." And when I turned my phone on, it's the last thing in the world that I ever expected that Dusty had passed away that morning.
Yeah, it was.
The whole plane emptied, and I'm still sitting in my seat trying to process that, and just wasn't ready for that.
I think we're still trying to process it. It's unbelievable. The two common goals on this podcast, common threads, no matter who I'm interviewing, are what I told you earlier about somebody always tells a lie or an exaggeration to get their big break. That's like clockwork. And then almost everybody to a man, and we've had probably 35, 40 guests on thus far in this run, talks about how Dusty Rhodes affected their life in some way, whether it's Tyrus, Brodus Clay, teaching him life lessons, or a young girl that we interviewed a couple of weeks ago named Allie, who's Impact Knockouts champion, who got to spend just a couple hours with Dusty in a WWE Performance Center camp. She couldn't keep, she kept going on about how it changed her life and her outlook and taught her lessons. And the guy has just left his mark on everybody, no matter, either as a performer, as a booker, as a teacher, as like I said, a life coach. It's just unbelievable. I can give you two names of people who, to me, were bigger than life, that the thought that the day they would come where they would no longer be with us. I mean, I couldn't imagine that they were bigger in life.
And that's Roddy Piper and Dusty Rhodes.
And I was in Miami Marlins Legends of Wrestling suite with Kevin and Kevin Nash. I looked at Kevin and we were doing an event there. I looked at Kevin and his head went down, like he's, started to get emotional, and we all looked over and he said Roddy passed, and
yep.
That was another one, and I never got a picture with either of them, JJ. I always just thought I could do it the next time, and so now I take pictures with almost everybody. Yep. Quick question. A few questions. I'm gonna let you go. You've been great with your time. Arn and Ole give notice September '88. Your office, but you're also their leader. Did you know? And if not, were you surprised? And what were your thoughts?
I knew they were going to New York.
Oh, you did know?
Yeah. They had told me. And I remember on the way back from Philadelphia Convention Hall that Arn and Tully dropped the tag titles to the Midnight Express.
Right.
And on the way back, it was a pretty good walk from the ring back to the one side of the arena where to get back. And I remember Tully saying, he said, James, you realize that it's all over tonight. I said, yeah, I do. And I said, we had something special that ended tonight. And, yeah. And it was like, we had a sold out house, and just the realization that, that they were going to leave. And they went to New York, and it wasn't 2 weeks later, I got a call from, this is like October, November. I get a call from Tully, and he says, and that's right after Crockett had sold the promotion to Ted Turner.
Right.
And Tully calls me, and he says, I don't know, how things are working out for you there, or what your situation is. He said, what I will tell you, that since we arrived here, there's a lot of people up here saying some very flattering good things about you. And he said, but they can't call you. You have to call them.
Right.
If there's any interest. And of course, I knew Terry Garvin from Kansas City. I knew him from Amarillo. So I called Terry. Terry says, oh my God, hold on, Pat's next door. He brings Pat in. I think I'd met Pat one time when he came to visit Terry in Kansas City. Put me on speakerphone, and it was like November, and I was going to go up to, before Lindsay and I got married, we were living together in Dallas, and we were going to go up to New York and go shopping for Christmas. And arrangements were made. And when I got to New York, I stayed at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square, and Vince had a car come into the city, pick me up, and take me to his home in Greenwich. And the idea was he didn't want me to meet him at the office in case the conversation didn't go anywhere. I wouldn't be put in an awkward position, that nobody knew that I was coming there to meet with him. And he came from TV, still had his makeup on. He said, I want to get back here as quick as I could, and apologize you had to wait. And we sat in his formal living room, and he basically offered me a job. And he said, I'm not looking for you to have the tights on. I'm looking for you, or even to walk off camera as a manager. I'm looking to you for what I'm told is your creative ideas, your attention to detail. And that's what I want for here. And he said, you can go back to Atlanta and tell them that we met and I'm interested in you, and use as leverage to get the best possible deal with them, because Turner had just bought from Crockett. And he said, or I hope that you'll consider this just on the basis of this conversation. And I said, let me talk to, Lindsay was with me. And I said, the next morning I called him back, and he made me a very generous offer. And I said, I'm going to take your deal. Went back and gave notice and started in February, and was there for almost 8 years.
I was going to get into that and also your time in WCW, but you've been so generous with your time. How about let's trying to play Let's Make a Deal here? Could I have you back in maybe a month or so, and we could just talk about your experiences in WWE and then the end of WCW?
Yeah, I would love to. I don't want to wear out my welcome with your listeners. I'm a storyteller, and I start telling stories, and it's
been great. But I feel like you've been so you've been so generous with your time that I'd love to get some of the because that was the Monday Night War. That was then at some point you went to WCW, and we all know I may know a lot, not a lot about a lot, but I know a lot about that because I lived it. So. The end of WCW and Eric and then Vince Russo and then Bill Bush and the guys threatening to walk out and all that. And I'd love to get your perspective on that. Probably not going to be as fun of a conversation as, talking about your career, going to Japan, going to Madison Square Garden and all that fun stuff. But if we could get you back to talk about that for about, 40 minutes, maybe down the road, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd love to come back and do it. I've been so thankful, and with every interview, when it's all over, I make a point of thanking the fans for everything I have. I owe to the fans. I was never the biggest, never the best. Nobody wanted it more than I did or was willing to work harder than I was, but that doesn't guarantee you success. The fans either are the ultimate ones to decide whether they want to buy a ticket to see you or not. So I look back sometimes and I just pinch myself that here I am after half a century, and I'm wearing 2 Hall of Fame rings, and like I say, I'm the luckiest guy in the world, and I could talk wrestling all night. So I would love to come back and join you, continue our conversation. There's a lot more that we could talk about, and glad that you were generous enough to give us this much time to talk.
It's an honor, and you may not have been the biggest or the best, JJ. I'm not saying that. You said it, but you were the hungriest, and you are the humblest. So.
Thank you.
God bless you, man. And you have a good week, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll bring you back and go in depth and into WCW and WWE and the Monday Night Wars and all that exciting stuff.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Want to thank JJ again. So generous with his time and such a really a humble guy. It amazes me that a guy like JJ Dillon sitting there at WrestleCon marking out for a guy like Bill Watts when there's, thousands of fans that paid tons of money to mark out for J.J. Dillon. Sometimes I don't think he understands his place in the business. But class act, and we look forward to having him back. We'll go in depth next time in the future here about his time behind the scenes in WWE and also behind the scenes in WCW. He was there the last 5.5 years, I believe. During the Eric Bischoff period and the Vince Russo period, during the infamous Bill Bush period where the Radicals walked out. Benoit dropped the world title that he had just won, and they walked out and went to WWE. And then the end of the road, and Vince buying the company. So I'd like to get his input on that. And so we look forward to doing that. And if you have any questions about any of that for JJ in the future, hit us up on Twitter at David Penzer or at Penzer Ringside. I will take notes, and so when we do have JJ back, we could ask him your questions about his time behind the scenes in WWE and in WCW. But lots of great stories and lots of great insight from one of the best, one of the humblest in the business, and I thank JJ Dillon. Want to thank you guys, too, for tuning in. Don't forget, we're on all platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, and all the other platforms. You can check us out, City Ringside, every Monday morning. We drop another episode, and we thank you for your support. If you have not already, please feel free to subscribe. Tell your friends and neighbors, and hey, if they let you leave a review, we'd love to hear the good or the bad, what you think of this podcast. Until next time, I'm David Penzer, and I'm still sitting ringside.
Follow David Penzer on Twitter at David Penzer. Also, make sure to follow the show on Twitter at Penzer Ringside. You've been sitting ringside with David Penzer on Radio Influence.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.